Greetings and welcome to CBM Calling. My name is Terry Smith and I'm glad to welcome you back to our live stream interview. Today I have three very dear friends and special guests. Gary Nelson is with us from Edmonton, Alberta. Gary is the president of Tyndale University and Seminary here in Toronto. He is my former boss. Gary was the general secretary at CBM for a long time. And Gary is a board member of Arab Baptist Theological Seminary, and we'll be discussing that during our call. I'm also delighted to welcome to CBM Calling Elie Haddad, CBM field staff and team lead for the Middle East and North Africa. Elie is the president of Arab Baptist Theological Seminary, and Mactan Accad. Martin is a professor at ABTS and is the director of the Institute for Middle East Studies. We have an important topic that we're going to be discussing today on Facebook Live, and I'm really grateful to have the three of you join me. First of all, Gary, a quick question to you. You've resettled in Edmonton just in the last couple of weeks, and I'm wondering how things are going for you and Carla and your father-in-law through all of the restrictions of COVID-19.
Yeah. Well, the good thing, you know, that I'm retiring as of June 30th. So the good thing was that the last month of my time at Tyndale in Toronto was because of COVID-19. I was able to move to Edmonton earlier because everything's done over Zoom. So I would say that this has been a great time in the last time, but it is a strange and really disorienting time at the same time.
Yeah, but we really miss you here in Toronto, and make sure that when the restrictions are lifted, we want you and Carla to come back and visit us. We look forward to having you.
For sure.
Welcome to Elie and Mactan. We recorded this interview a couple of hours ago because we wanted to give our two friends a little bit of a break because of the time difference, and also to ensure that the internet connection was stable. Let's listen to the conversation. Thanks for joining us today from Beirut. We're grateful to have you with us. I'm going to ask you a first question, and it's an easy one. How are you and your families coping during this time of COVID-19 restrictions? Elie?
Well, we're coping fine despite all the pressures and everything else. It's a new thing for me to be stuck at home for that long. Usually I travel a lot, so my wife Mireille is happy that I'm at home. But the flip side of that is working from home, we lost any kind of boundaries between work and the rest of our lives. So we're in front of a laptop 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So it's messy.
How about you, Martin?
Yeah, I thought life would slow down a little bit with this crisis, but it hasn't. I mean, we're under quite a bit of stress from so many fronts. I mean, as a family with children, with young children, we have to do a lot of the teaching for our kids at home to keep up with their school programs. So, you know, we've become teachers of our children as well. You know, homeschoolers. We hadn't signed up for that, and we have to manage all the changes that ABTS and IMES are having to go through as a result of this pandemic. And it feels like everything, you know, a lot of the work we're doing takes longer on virtual platforms than it used to. And then Lebanon is not only having to deal with this health crisis, but we also have to, you know, the country is reeling from economic and political crises as well that have been going for months and years. And so, you know, with the cost of living that has rocketed and there's not enough political stability to lead to some sort of adjustment in the national economic and financial sectors. So
it's very difficult and crazy times that we're living in. Let me jump right into the topic of our conversation. The reason I invited the two of you to join Gary and me today is because you've had to make a very difficult decision about changing the format of an annual event that's been very important both for you in Lebanon and for us as Canadians, and that is the Middle East Conference. Martin, I know that you give leadership to that. Could you give us a little bit of background about what the Middle East Conference has been typically as an event and why it is having to change?
Yeah, well, the Middle East conference became quickly the flagship event at ABTS, an annual event during the month of June. And we've had to adapt from the beginning since we launched in 2004 with the with the changing times. So the event began as the Middle East Conference, and it was a bit of a mini course over 5 days where friends and partners from all over the world would come to learn together about Islam and about Middle Eastern issues. And after our 10th conference, as the war in Syria and the ensuing refugee crisis was raging, we decided to shift from conference to consultation. And so the consultation brought together various people who were working on refugee issues. Then we had a series, on discipleship issues all around the world. And we were able to share together our learning and the challenges that we were facing as these challenges became increasingly global. Now, this year with the COVID-19 crisis, that has also caused a new shift, and we moved from consultation to conversations. And so, we've been able to keep the MEC acronym. We love acronyms. And so from conference to consultation to conversations. And in a series of 6 webinars, monthly, beginning this month of June, we'll be addressing various topics in relationship with the COVID-19 crisis. So on the 18th of this month, 18th of June, we'll start with laying out the various challenges that were brought on by the crisis through the overall framework of change. So the whole issue of change is what we want to explore in that first webinar. And then we'll tackle topics like theological education and missiology and pastoral and mental care and displacement and so on as they relate to the pandemic crisis. So the MEC will continue to be an important platform for reflection, for conversation, for dialogue on important issues that relate to Islam and Christian-Muslim relations and the Middle East within the evangelical world globally.
Boy, I commend you for your ability to adapt to the context that you're facing and the challenges that you have. I know that the Middle East Conference is part of a bigger program that you give leadership to, Martin, called the Institute for Middle East Studies. And I love the fact that IMES, another acronym, is all about bringing positive transformation in the Middle East. And that you believe deeply. I mean, we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and I've taken courses from you. You really believe deeply in the importance of peace building and of interfaith understanding in the Middle East and North Africa. How has both the COVID-19 crisis and the economic upheaval in Lebanon affected some of your peace building initiatives?
Quite radically, really. You mentioned part of our mandate, and our mandate says that, so bringing about positive transformation in thinking and practice. So for us, the thinking and the practice are both very important. We're not just an intellectual or a thinking institution, but we believe that what we think has to be applicable on the ground. And so this is where the peace building comes in. And the peace building is a little bit of the sandbox of our ideas, and that's where we do the interventions, and then we assess the outcome of and the success of achieving the goals that we think we are trying to do. So we've had to rethink many things, but primarily we've had to rethink what are the primary objectives that our peace building initiatives were designed for, because we couldn't anymore run them as we used to before. So we had to go back to the objectives. We've had to ask, how do we continue to achieve these objectives in those new conditions that we find ourselves in? So for instance, we have a youth peace building initiative called Khibz Milh, which means bread and salt, and is a symbol of hospitality in Arab culture. We were able actually to transition that initiative completely online on the Zoom platform. And when I say we have two members of the INES team that are completely focused on that initiative, and they've done a tremendous job of adapting. Now they've had to split each group of about 14 to 15 people into two groups in order to be able to make them more manageable in an online platform. So that doubles the work for our team, even though for the recipients, the beneficiaries, they're experiencing a similar sort, although in a very different kind of format. But we've also had to modify some of our curriculum so that it would speak to the current struggles that our young people are facing. We can't, the exploration has to be at this time, how does our faith intersect and interact with the pandemic crisis? So that doubles the work for our team as well, so they've had to do a lot of work on the curriculum. For another initiative we have is called the Friendship Network between church and mosque goers, and there we work with faith leaders and with faith communities in churches and mosques, and it's the sort of gatherings between Christian and Muslim faith communities that we used to hold face to face. That was a very important aspect, and doing them online is not really the same. So we've maintained regular contact with the network of faith leaders that we've created nationally, and with whom and through which we were running the initiative. After some discussion with them about the role of faith leaders in times like these, because if in time of crisis we have nothing to add to the reality, then what's the point of creating those sorts of networks? So we decided to do together a prayer video, and some of you might have seen that video, and where each faith leader raises a brief prayer to God for protection, for healing, for grace in these hard times. We're actually soon releasing an English subtitled version of it. We began by releasing it in Arabic in the country and region. Also, we're close to launching a relief initiative as well, where a Christian and a Muslim leader together will be offering food assistance to some of the neediest in their communities. But they'll do it always together. So they will move together across sectarian lines. And that's precisely what the Friendship Network was set up to do. And that's what I mean when I said that we had to go back to the original objectives of our initiative. So we're modeling multi-faith communities in Lebanon that are very divided along sectarian lines. And we're modeling the fact that it is possible to work for the common good out of love and care across sectarian lines, inspired by values that our faiths teach us, and for us, we highlight the values of Christ and his teaching that is countercultural on the kingdom of God.
Martin, so much of what I've been reading is that during times of crisis like COVID-19, strong organizations can remain faithful to their mission, but they have to change pretty much everything about their means that by which they accomplish that mission. And what you just described for IMES and the Middle East Conference are exactly that. Let me jump over to you, Elie. All of us on this call, all four of us, have a strong commitment to theological education. And we're all passionate about raising up leaders for the mission of God in the world. How are you helping to prepare your school? You're the president of Arab Baptist Theological Seminary. How are you addressing some of these changes? And what is it looking like for you as you engage in this process?
Yeah, as you know, Terry, as Martin mentioned as well, so this is not our first crisis with the pandemic. We started with the economic collapse in mid last year, and then uprising, and then now we have the pandemic. So we have crisis upon crisis that we have to deal with. Very quickly, with closures that happened as a result of the pandemic, we had to make decisions. So we went into emergency measures so that we can complete the academic year for our residential students. Fortunately, we had been investing a lot in our online platform. So we have enough resources that we are able to switch from in-class instruction to online instruction with the minimum additional work. So we are doing that. We extended the academic year until September. Some of our residential students were able to go back home. Some of them are stuck in Lebanon because of the airport has closed. So this has added an additional dimension of stress, having to be concerned about the safety and health of our students as well as they stay in Lebanon and away from their own families and countries. So this is as an emergency measure. But now we're looking forward. Okay, what do we do after that? And what happens next year? Will we be able to bring in students? Will the airports be open? Will we be able to get them visas? At the same time, we have a huge financial crisis that has its impact on ABTS. So we're having to really think seriously about the future of ABTS. And we want to do changes not based just on economics, but based on strategy and God's calling. And so we've been having some very energizing conversations looking at what God's doing in the region, the role of the church, what kind of leaders do we need for the future, and what's the best way to come alongside these leaders and equip them and form them. What does it take for them to be formed well? How much do we need to have them as a cohort in community, building community life and the transformative elements that come with it? And how much is it good to keep them in ministry context and come alongside them as they are doing ministry? So we're looking at so many options and looking at option of what we're calling a modified residential program, where we have a mixture of both. They're in ministry and we bring them to some residencies in Lebanon with contingencies that if we cannot bring them to Lebanon, how can we continue with them? And the ability these days to leverage the technology that we have is amazing. We're talking today and all four of us are in different cities, and we're able to have this meaningful conversation. So we need to leverage this technology and use it for the sake of the church.
Brilliant. That's amazing. I first visited Arab Baptist Theological Seminary in 1997 when my wife and I were working in Paris, France, and I brought a group of students from Nogent Bible Institute along with Paul Saunders, and we visited ABTS. And honestly, for 23 years now, ABTS has been an important part of my own spiritual awareness of what God is doing in the MENA region. Likewise, Martin, I want you to know that the Middle East Conference and IMES are really important vehicles for helping us as Canadian Baptists understand God's work in your region of the world. So I am really, truly grateful. And by the way, we do want to encourage people who are watching this in our Canadian Baptist family to tune into the conversations that'll be happening. One last question for you, if I can, Elie. Among your many hats that you wear, you're also a global field staff and a team lead for CBM for all of our work in the MENA region. And the question that I have is, you know that our churches in Canada, many of our donors, have a deep connection to God's kingdom work in your region of the world. Can you identify some ways that we can be more involved in the ministry?
Yeah, God is at work in the region, and we're a region that's full of conflict and strife and so many things. And these times of conflict are great times for the gospel. People experience hopelessness and despair, and they need meaning, they need purpose. This is the time that the churches need to talk about God and talk about the gospel and talk about reconciliation, talk about hope and all of these things. So it's an amazing time in the middle of this mess for the gospel to penetrate and to get into new people groups. And we're seeing this over and over again. So we're blessed at ABTS that we get students from all over the Arab world. They get trained and they go back into ministry into the Arab world. And CBM has come alongside ABTS and training leaders and come alongside the project which works with alumni of ABTS out in the region. So and with the work of Canadian churches, they have been doing this, and we want to do more of that. We have projects running in Lebanon and Syria and Sudan and Morocco, and we'd like to do more of that. It's amazing for rural churches in Canada. They are involved in what God's doing in Sudan and Morocco and Syria and Lebanon. Uh, this is globalization for you, a global body of Christ coming together to accomplish His will for this time. We're grateful for the Canadian churches. We're grateful for partnership. We cannot exist without partnerships, so we are grateful for that.
Well, let me also say that we are grateful for you, for both of you, for the work that your wives are involved in Beirut. It's remarkable. We follow with keen interest what both of your families are doing in the work of ABTS and IMES. I'm going to pivot over now and ask a question of one of your board members, Elie. Gary Nelson is on our call, and Gary is a dear friend of the work that you are doing. I recorded the conversation with Elie and Mactan a little earlier this afternoon. We're back live, and I'm grateful to have you. There we go. And I am hearing that I am muted, which I am not. But we are unmuted, and there we go. Glad to be back live with you, Gary. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. You're a board member at Arab Baptist Theological Seminary, and I know that you have spent a lot of time in your recent history, and probably more in the last 2 months, trying to think through the ramifications of remote access learning. And I'm wondering how you feel that that is going to change the way we train leaders.
Well, it's a great question, and I don't know if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book Tipping Point, but to me, I think what's happened because of COVID and so many things is that what would probably have been a much longer process, getting people who are reluctant, educational institutions which are notoriously slow in their movement, and getting and literally tipping them over the edge where they had no choice, so they had to figure it out. Now, we've been lucky at Tyndale because we've been working on this for 15 years, and so we had a platform that was robust enough to take us into those things. But I think the basic change is that you're now kind of dealing like there is no other way, and so it's pushed people into a whole new way of thinking. And you've got people who are kind of the early adapters, and all of a sudden they're discovering new things. But then you've also got people who still think that they're living in a dream world, that when this is all over, we'll go back to the way things were. And I think everything has been turned upside down, not just distant education, but just everything.
I heard a hilarious comment the other day about our church services. And the quote goes this way: if Welch's grape juice and Wonder Bread is good enough for Jesus, it should be good enough for us. And so, too often we think that the way we do things or the way we have done things is really the only way that we can.
Yeah, it pushes you back into
to
looking, what are the outcomes? And as opposed to thinking that the methods are the things that we hold on to. It's like church, like people kept saying, church is closing, church is closed.
Yeah.
When in truth, worship was closed.
Mm-hmm.
Church was still the church.
Yeah, exactly. Which leads me to my other question, Gary. And I know that I've worked with you for many years. I've seen you as president of Tyndale and as the head of CBM, but deep down, you are ultimately a pastor. And your heart has always been for the local church. And I will proudly say that you are a Canadian Baptist pastor. And I'm just wondering, as you think of the situation right now in the Middle East and North Africa, and I mean, you've journeyed with the Middle East Conference over all these years, and frequent attendee and a participant as well, and a speaker at it. Gary, what do you think our churches in Canada need to be paying attention to around what God is doing in the Middle East?
I've thought about that, and I think one of the things is this is not new for them. Like they as the minority people in a culture in which they're always kind of having to respond to whatever the context is and whatever the conditions are. I mean, there is a sense that this flexibility. I mean, to take which has been something that has been a very successful kind of delivery model, and then to turn itself inside out and say, no, we're going to have to go in a whole new direction. I think courage and resilience are the two words that I would use about the leaders in the Middle East. I think their ability to make bold decisions, I think they realize that there's no decision in a crisis is 100% perfect.
Yeah.
And they're willing to take the courage to take the risks. And I think that's what the church in Canada can learn from them.
Isn't that true? I mean, I loved when Elie said that this COVID crisis isn't the first crisis that they've had to face.
No.
It is for most of our Canadian Baptist churches. Like, we have not lived through crises the way our Lebanese brothers and sisters have.
Yeah,
and
no,
we have
it's
a
very
lot
true.
to learn. Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
I think that's what, I mean, they've also learned that they have perspective. They know you can get through this, but they also know you can't go back to the way it was.
Yeah.
And I think those themes keep running through my mind.
Don't
I
we want our
can't believe the number of people I keep talking to that think that once this is over, everything will be the same again.
it won't be, will it?
No.
It sure won't be.
Not a chance.
Yeah, and we're called as God's people to be forward looking, to cherish the legacy that our work has been built upon, but not to think that we're going to be able to return to.
Right.
The Newbegin describes how the water of the river keeps flowing,
Right.
and we meet up on the other side of the stream at a
Right.
different point. And that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it's interesting. With Don Pastursky and I wrote a book together in the late 90s called Future Faith Churches, and it was just at the turn of the century. And we kept getting invited to these conferences that had the title, The Future of the Church in the 21st Century. And I can remember saying, I have absolutely no doubt about the future of the church in the 21st century. I just have some doubt about whether our churches will be part of that future. Because if we're not willing to deal with the times that we're in, we're greatly prepared for the 20th century. We're not focusing and facing the future.
Yeah. Thank you for your insight, your wisdom, and your heart as a pastor. Gary and I wrote a book with Gord King a few years ago, and it was the result of hours of conversation as we carpooled together to get from where we lived in Mimico to the office of CBM. And I'm really grateful for your friendship and the wisdom and your leadership in many different circles, Gary. It's been great to have you with us on
Thanks, Terry.
CBM Calling. Thank you so much. A little shout out to some of our friends who have been watching us and following us. Our dear friend Estella is with us again, and we're always glad for your presence. As I would also add, Nancy Webb, a long-standing friend and supporter and champion of God's mission, both in our city as well as around the world, and Kathleen Susi as well. And a friend of yours, Gary, Marilyn Phillips, is watching us and with us today on our call.
Great.
I want to invite everyone that is watching us today to pay particular attention to CBM Calling this coming Friday at 2:30. My colleague Jennifer Lau will be interviewing Tanika Shepard, who is the director of Baptist Women of North America. She's an African-American pastor. Jen will also be interviewing Mitch Randall, who is a journalist and the editor of Ethics Daily, a Baptist publication, online publication. And they're going to be talking about racism in America and some lessons that we can be learning as Canadians. I invite you all to tune in this coming Friday. Thanks again to Elie and Mactan for the interview, and thank you, Gary, for being part of our conversation.
Great.
Greetings to your family in Edmonton.
Thanks, Terry.
God bless.